Thank you, Tim, and thank you all for being here. It's an honor to, again, gather for the second year in a row so many of the leaders from the energy industry, the technology industries, and the investment industries, and converge into what we think is one of the most exciting both dynamics and investment opportunities potentially of our generation. Well, we'll talk a bit today about the trends that we're seeing in the energy industry, including prominently renewable energy potentially being at or past an inflection point, as well as the industrialization of renewables and the supply chain needs going into that. Thank you. Some disclaimer language here. Across the technology industry, the opportunity for what we believe is wide learning becoming the next deep learning, also the democratization of data science, and increasing trend from human-machine interface towards integration. And then finally, a brief overview on Blue Bear performance in our portfolio companies collectively. We're now through the portfolio managing or involved with over 20 gigawatts of power generation, sustainable power generation, thousands of conventional assets, and collectively revenues have grown 4x since we've invested on average, and fund performance is 40 to 50% IRR to date. So that's been a very successful journey so far. We hope to continue that and build towards even further growth, both within the existing portfolio and in Fund 2, which is just starting. So the energy industry is in a period of rapid evolution, as we all know. There's a common refrain that hydrocarbons and fossil fuels will continue to dominate because of physics and chemistry, in particular factors like energy density. But of course, that can't be the only factor driving the merit order. Here is one of our favorite authors, Randall Munroe's illustrated if energy density were the only factor, we would have gone full nuclear decades ago. So economics, infrastructure, and policy are also key considerations, and many of these are starting to favor renewable generation sources. Here's a graphic from another one of our favorite authors, John Brown, from his brilliant book, Make, Think, Imagine, available in newsstands everywhere. This depicts the rapid decline of the cost curve for solar panels and in parallel, rapid increase of the penetration of that technology in the market. And you may or may not want to read the caption there. Of course, the best way to demonstrate all of this progress is through real market indicators. We've got power projects priced as low as 2 cents a kilowatt hour, generation from renewable sources, initially eclipsing coal, and now gradually, actually all of fossil fuels in markets like the UK. And one of my favorite headlines is this being done without subsidy. So that's one of the key considerations for us as financially minded investors, that we're underwriting fundamental economic performance and not exposed to potentially changing governments or things that don't work in a largely free market. Of course, subsidy may often be involved in less direct ways, for example, in transmission or siting decisions, but that infrastructure itself is also attracting dramatic levels of investment and founder activity. This is one page from a much longer presentation on grid technologies that Carolyn's put together with Vaughn. And you see here there have been over 1,000 grid technology businesses started in the last several years. We've directly screened about 200 of them, and actually most recently invested in our first. And these cover everything from generation to transmission to distribution to network operation. One of the most difficult challenges remains energy storage. We're also confident that there's a solution set to invest in here. Blue Bear attended one of the first, we believe, mainstream energy storage events just a couple years ago that felt like it was at an abandoned railway station in London. And you see there's about 6 people. You can see in the audience here is virtually more on stage. Fast forward just 2 years, and we're now having events regularly around the world attracting thousands of attendees. This matters because it demonstrates entrepreneurial talent, investment capital, and strategic support being brought to bear in one of the critical bottlenecks of larger scale diverse energy source deployment. Another big challenge has been transmission. So in 2019, even high voltage DC transmission is sexy. And if you don't believe that, you'll meet Michael Skelly later today.
You won't believe it's sexy.
So all of this is supported by policy. The Green New Deal has become extremely politicized. There's a certain congressperson from New York who's been prominently associated with the initiative in Congress. but polling shows that the underlying initiatives and motivations of job creation for new industries, sustainable energy generation, energy independence, are all broadly supported across the political spectrum. All these people have a plan and an initiative. The only question now is not if, but how from most of the party. And even some of the most hardened critics are seeing some green shoots. It's just a beautiful photo. And a bit of a haiku on the bottom here. So there are very credible reasons to concern yourself with the trade-off between near-term economic development and potential long-term risk management. Science is unfortunately never 100% settled. That's the nature of science. Even technically, gravity is not definitively proven. But at some point, the body of evidence is compelling enough and the risks of being wrong are great enough that, as probably the NASA engineers here would confirm, you don't want to jump out a window. So we're seeing a lot of attraction of building a supply chain behind this wave of growth, not just building generation, but building the many complicated engineering, project management, distribution, procurement technologies involved in bringing these technologies to market. Here you see a schematic of the tip of the iceberg of dozens and dozens of subcategories that are emerging into a multi-trillion-dollar new growth industry. And as we've said, this is a really engineering-driven activity, which should feel very familiar to those who have a long career in oil and gas in particular. Where does that leave oil country? So the sentiment is not great right now. Some of your vaulted logos are being turned into best-selling Halloween masks, but that doesn't change the fact that hydrocarbons still provide over 80% of the world's energy and power and remain an extremely critical and sophisticated component of the world economy. And actually, the conventional energy industry has long been one of the biggest drivers of technology development and adoption. My favorite statistic here is that super majors have typically hosted the world's largest supercomputer. The big change here over the last few years is these technologies have, by oil and gas majors, been guarded closely and kept internally as critical, internal, and sensitive operations. The move more recently is to the cloud. Bringing all of your data onto somebody else's server is a big, big step that's now opening, we think, floodgates towards more flexible interaction with the tech community and with a much larger universe of external specialists and vertical solution providers. So SaaS engagements are a great representation of this, and we've seen some large traditional energy companies more and more commonly work with startups or at least independent businesses on vertical solutions, applying something like AI or computer vision or virtual reality to individual operations that they would have in past years wanted to control internally. And these also happen to be lucrative business models which together converge towards what we call the operating system of the new energy industry. These business models have been proven out in a number of other categories of the economy. We don't need to go into that here, but we have a number of proof points for the outperformance financially of this market. So an index of vertical SaaS solutions is one of the, if not actually the best performing basket of companies on, for example, the Toronto Stock Exchange. And then more recently, we've seen one of our friends, RigUp, go from a complete startup just a few years ago to a $2 billion valuation nearly. And actually, Blue Bear has now screened over 1,500 companies. RigUp was one of the first 5 we looked at. At the time, we didn't have the fund ready enough to execute on that investment, but we're hopeful that there's a number of other successes of that caliber in the portfolio, so no pressure to the presenting CEOs today. And the RigUp example is actually very stark, as one of our friends, Jacob here from the Digital Wildcatters, Jacob and Colin, pointed out in a tweet. RigUp is now comparing to a short list of E&Ps that have a smaller market value than this recent tech startup. And actually, that small list is not so small. So that's a really striking example of the growth potential for pure, straightforward, software-only business with relatively little breakthrough innovation, if any, just smart execution in an industry that needed a modern solution. So across the board, where do we see investment opportunity behind these drivers? It's in a lot of the unsexy, boring, but critical operations behind building, deploying, operating, managing, and eventually decommissioning these trillions of dollars of assets. And we can group these into a number of different supply chain categories and technology layers, and that has been manifest in our identification of the top 1% or so of our total screening log to businesses that we've now been fortunate to invest in, and you'll hear more from later today. So how about technology itself? There's a number of themes we're especially excited in. One of these is wide learning as the next deep learning. We have a critical challenge in context awareness. So direct data processing and compute, digital technologies, or AI, if you want to use that term, have now proven superiority, and technically quantum superiority, if you believe Google, to any other traditional method or human computation. However, there's virtually no awareness of why this computation is being done and what it means in a broader context. And an extreme version of this is what's known as the paperclip problem. If you were to program an AI to maximize paperclip production, it may slay all of humanity to harness and extract our carbon to make more paper clips. So, bad clippy. That can be supported with more awareness of why the initial objective was set, what potential trade-offs are. So there are a few different methods that we can go about, or the industry can go about to deliver context awareness. One of those is essentially brute force. An example here is Amazon Turk, which is a service Amazon offers. You can literally pay thousands of programmers to manually type in facts that you want to be referenced in your algorithms, like water is wet, fire is hot, heat hurts, hurt is bad, and allow your primary algorithm to access that context in its decision making. That's a little bit like cramming for a quiz. You're assembling in sort of a knowledge graph a number of elements of knowledge, but you're not necessarily intuiting the relationships between them or truly learning them. Another approach is what we call exploration. The most attractive example here recently is reinforcement learning, which Google and DeepMind use to basically go on a bloody crusade of the world's board games against poor human contestants. And here, starting with a completely blank slate, just assessing and experiencing what are the actions or patterns that lead to the ideal conclusion. So if this can be broadened out, you could achieve solutions that are maybe not as intuitive to a human user. And as the chart on the right here shows, the blue line, this is a little bit slower to start, but can scale to absolutely superior achievement levels. The challenge for humans is we don't have infinite scenarios to run trial and errors on. We need to get a well drilled or a turbine installed correctly the first time, otherwise we lose a lot of money and potentially jeopardize or risk health and safety. So it's a useful tool, but not definitively the solution. Another is a great network of expert networks. So download a packet and now I know Kung Fu. This is a little bit like how the human brain works, with specialties and capabilities compartmentalized biologically, and it's also kind of how the internet works. There's a lot of things now that we believe we know that actually we just look up and feel like we know. So there are a number of tools here at the disposal of developers and us as operators, and here you can see I'm losing some context awareness myself. But what does this all imply for the actual investment program we're embarking on? We feel that those opportunities of connecting disparate fields of knowledge into superior execution engines is the most exciting opportunity. So investing in the connective tissue, some of the middleware, things that enable API integration, and even IT, OT connectivity between organizations or supply chain components are actually maybe less interesting than pure AI, which will let Google and IBM battle over computational superiority, but the most commercially valuable and impactful. Of course, that all generates masses of data. Data science is a big buzzword, as many of our colleagues know. We're, for example, often losing data scientists, not often, but sometimes losing data scientists to Facebook or Google for an extra 10, 20% salary bump. This escalation is a little bit a matter of definitions. Data science is really just the cool new name for statistics, but there also is a significant step change in the amount of data being unleashed and therefore the need to analyze it. That is, we feel, becoming more and more democratized and even automated in a sense. Google released TensorFlow 2.0 earlier this year. We believe that's a big innovation in the accessibility of data science, allowing people to run sessions and analytics and learn to do so even, and then run them in probably an order of magnitude shorter time. And businesses like NVIDIA are following the same suit. So this is positive because it enables broader access. a risk factor here is it brings more of that magic back behind a curtain or into a black box where you're not sure exactly how the operation, the calculation is being performed, but it's easier to work with as a user. The extreme of this, of course, is a more complete automation of data science. And here's a, we think, insightful quote from Max Tegmark. The concept that AI getting better at us than AI research, that milestone may potentially already be behind us. So we think we'll learn pretty soon what the real capabilities of AI in these fields are. And the investment conclusion for us then is to be very mindful of innovations in data science, but again, focus more on specific applications and business purposes than on hard, deep tech. And then the final field here that we'll talk about is immersive and eventually integrated technologies with the human experience or even the human body. If you're able to get a really high quality augmented reality or virtual reality experience now for a few $100 or used less than $100, you're able to really change the way that developers and entrepreneurs can be creative and help evolve the way operations are done in industrial markets. And we're looking at a few live examples here. Another very glamorous example is the latest Alexa skill, is the voice control to raise your toilet seat. If that's the kind of incremental operation that this a decade ago unthinkable technology is now being used for, we have a lot of opportunity to deploy these technologies for better uses. A couple more quick examples. The direct physical integration of technology with our bodies, most dramatically brain-computer interfaces. Those are now beyond science fiction. There are really credible startups working on this. Some positive examples from the medical industry are here. Another example we love is actually more behavioral. It doesn't necessarily need to be physical, but behavioral. Veterans with PTSD have been shown to reveal and discuss more of their symptoms with an AI consultant than with a human medical professional. And you can imagine that translating somewhat to, for example, an oil field worker who'd rather not say, I don't know, to his or her supervisor, but might look for more resources and advice if they can do that digitally. There are, of course, a number of dark sides with this technology development. One of the most prominent is cybersecurity. As David Drescher, the Mission Secure CEO, likes to say, there are two kinds of utilities, the ones that have been hacked and the ones who don't know they've been hacked. And so we're excited to be investing in a business that's able to detect, prevent, and intervene with those sort of attacks. And I believe Mission Secure can now stop virtually any cyber attack except for a guy wearing a ski mask. So still working on that final tier. And the prospect of technology inequality, the most commonly discussed manifestation of this is the tech elites controlling more and more, not just capital, but power and influence, influencing elections, for example. That's absolutely a risk. A more subtle risk here is best demonstrated in what's called the elephant graph, where, yes, those tech elites have become a lot better off thanks to technology, but also the mass of society below the 80% mark has benefited dramatically as well. That trough is essentially upper and middle class people in Western countries, so us. Who cares about us? Well, morally, who knows? But that small segment of the world population tends to be exactly who elects the world's most influential leaders. So it's very important to stay mindful about how people feel their interaction with technology and their relative wealth increase is perceived. And there goes the bar. And then finally, I was going to spend more of this talk talking about deep fakes, but those have become so prevalent over the last year, it's no longer really worth demonstrating. Everybody's aware of these. It's actually encouraging to see that Congress has held multiple testimonies about this. So Congress is often derided as being technology illiterate. When it affects them directly, they tend to snap to and pay closer attention. And here's really a striking quote from a former FBI terrorism task force member. The U.S. government must always be the purveyor of facts and truth, ensuring the effective administration of democracy from a shared basis of reality. That's kind of a terrifying statement. But understandable. I think it's actually so important we need to read it one more time from the White House lawn directly. The U.S. government must always be the purveyor of facts and truth from a shared basis of reality. This is actually one of the most popular early, really shallow fakes, and don't worry, Joe Biden loves it, published in The Onion. And it's just demonstrating how easy, and this is, of course, basic, but video and audio are now being compiled. I actually think this will not be a long-term threat because the literacy of decision makers is rapidly going to grow to know that they can't rely on any form of technological demonstration of a person or speech as necessarily true. But that does raise the opportunity for investment in another class of sort of encryption, decryption, trust verification technologies. At some point, we'll think of a name for that category that represent yet another tech investment opportunity. Now, going very briefly through how all of this has come together for Blue Bear's actual investment performance and the portfolio companies, you're all familiar with our investment strategy. We have, again, been fortunate to be exposed to over 20 gigawatts of sustainable energy generation and thousands of conventional assets. And here's a quick snapshot of our log from just 1 quarter of deal screening. If you squint, kind of looks like a seismic chart. We have not yet AIified our own screening. We try to invest where we can get the maximal upside with the best downside protection. So at early revenue stage, proof of concept already achieved, and now it's time to scale largely through introductions with great KPIs, but with a fit for the end markets that we're directly serving. And all of that comes through a very rigorous sourcing, screening, and execution system, and is often driven by and supported by many of you in the room. So some of our best and most exciting investment prospects and now portfolio companies have come from the private equity firms who are involved with us as investors or co-investors, from energy operators, and from management teams themselves, referring us to colleagues of theirs who've enjoyed working with us and want to kind of grow the Blue Bear family. That's resulted in these first 11 investments we've made. You'll hear from each individually. There's actually 10 on the page, the 11th Copper Labs. We've just completed our investment in over the last several days, so we'll be excited to hear from them. And to the far right, you see some of the world-class co-investors we've been privileged to join up with. Performance-wise, we've removed the names and numbers here just because we try to keep this data sensitive and share it only with our investors and out of respect for all portfolio companies. But on average, our revenue growth rates of the portfolio are about 4 times, and valuation increases have been substantial and reasonably consistent. We hope to continue that and continue to grow that through the rest of Fund 1 and the subsequent fund. The portfolio is very well balanced. You see here the distribution of our capital exposure to companies. The difference is primarily around who's had the fastest follow-on rounds, and then the breakdown between conventional energy exposure and more diversified approach and renewables-driven exposure, with finally a nod towards which are the most vertical solutions versus broad horizontal technologies. And again, we very much appreciate the support of the community. This helps us underwrite, source, execute, and hopefully grow companies. And I'll close with that. If anybody would like a free ticket to next year's event, all you have to do is offer a contract to any one of the presenting portfolio companies today, and we'll take it from there. So thank you very much, and we'll hand over to Carolyn, who will make introductions to each of the individual companies now.